Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Enterprise Network Automation for 2020 and beyond. My name is Amy Anderson and I will be moderating today's event. Our featured speaker is Seamus McGillicuddy, Research Director at EMA. Seamus has more than 12 years of experience in the IT industry as an industry analyst and journalist. At EMA, he is the Research Director for the Network Management Practice. While Seamus will defer answering your questions until the conclusion of today's event, we encourage you to log your questions throughout the course of the presentation using the chat functionality located in the left-hand corner of your screen. Today's event is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the on-demand version along with some additional resources, so be on the lookout for an email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow. And now I'd like to turn it over to today's featured speaker, Seamus McGillicuddy. Seamus?
Thank you, Amy. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Today I'll be talking about enterprise network automation initiatives based on, it'll be offering us some highlights from some research that we published earlier this month. Before I go any further, I want to recognize the sponsors of this research, all vendors that have some role to play in the network automation world. Those include Glueware, iTential, Kaloom, and Red Hat. So thank you to all four of those companies for helping make this research possible. We are indebted to you. For today's agenda, at a high level, I'm going to talk very briefly about the research goals and methodology that I used for this project. Then I'm going to look at network automation tools, specifically what are enterprises using. I won't be talking about specific vendors. This is more about classes of technology, characteristics of the technology that they're using, things like that. Just getting a sense of requirements and goals. Then we'll talk about automation priorities, specifically what are enterprises automating based on the data that we collected from the market. And finally, we'll talk about how network automation isn't easy. We'll look at some of the things that challenge these guys, because 37% of the people we surveyed said they were fully successful with their network automation initiatives, which means that quite a few of them see room for improvement or having difficulty determining their level of success at this time. So we're going to look at some challenges. So first, research goals and methodology. My goal was to understand the state of the art of network automation, not to understand what the whole industry, the whole IT world is doing, but to get a sense of the state of the art of network automation initiatives in general. What people are doing when they're focused on this. And a lot of them are focused on this because about a year and a half ago in a different survey that was not focused exclusively on the topic of network automation, I asked 250 mainstream network managers in the enterprise world across North America and Europe whether they had an internal initiative in place to expand their use of automation on the network, and more than 90% said yes. And 70% of them characterized that as a high priority for their organization. So my goal was to understand what that means for these people. What technologies are they using? What goals do they have with automation? What kind of business impacts they're experiencing from it? And what kinds of challenges they encounter along the way. My methodology for this research was to survey 250 enterprise IT professionals who confirmed for us that they were engaged with a formal sponsored network automation initiative. The majority of them, about 80% of them, were technology experts, subject matter experts, and about 20% of them were leading from a IT management perspective. They told us that they were setting goals and budgets and things like that. We supplemented that data collection with some qualitative analysis based on 6 focal interviews with hands-on automation experts, people in the enterprise space who were specifically engaged in a network automation initiative, most of them at very large enterprises, Fortune 100s. So tools, what are they using? A single off-the-shelf solution is rare. I mean, there are off-the-shelf solutions to adopt, but people rarely stop there. Most of the people we surveyed told us that they were using multiple tools for automation. 40% said they had 2, almost more than a third said they had 3, and a small minority of them had 4 or more. So, they might be using something in the data center, something in campus, something in on the wide area, or maybe they're using a couple things in the data center. They're patching together multiple things, and what they're patching together is varied as well. On the right, you see the general classes of network automation technology used or planned for use. This is how we defined it. Third-party, multi-vendor network automation software was the most popular, slightly ahead of general IT automation software adapted for network devices. Something like an infrastructure as a code solution that is applied to network technology. Then you see also quite popular is automation solutions embedded in or applied to a single network vendor. So probably a network vendor who has native automation solutions that work primarily with their platforms. Might be a zero-touch provisioning capability, or maybe it's some sort of orchestration solution that applies only to their hardware and software. And then you see more rarely, these guys are focused on one-off scripts, scripts that are doing single tasks, written by the network engineering team, not necessarily part of a larger software platform. That's the way people have been doing automation for a while, but among these guys, it's somewhat rare, but still a significant number of them doing it. And at least one of the focal interviews that I talked to was using this as their primary approach. He was at a very large North American research university. And then DIY homegrown automation software, maybe taking some open source pieces and combining it with some homegrown software developed in-house. Maybe you're building some software around something else that you're automating. Like I've talked to at least a few users or adopters of software-defined networking in the data center this year who told me that they were writing in-house software to automate their management of SDN. And actually one of the focal interviews I talked to for this research also noted that they had plans to do that. So that's pretty common, but not dominant. Some essential elements of automation that we saw in this research. Number one, we saw that device APIs are really important to a lot of them. More than half said APIs on network devices are critical to my automation. This is the southbound interface for automation solutions quite often, and they, rather than write scripts that talk to the CLI of multiple network platforms, maybe they want some APIs that simplify that southbound communication with the network solutions and their infrastructure. More than half say that's critical. 44% said helpful but not required. So they're happy to interface with their network hardware in some other way when they're automating, creating an automation pipeline of some kind. On the right, you see the top 4 most cited challenges with APIs delivered by network hardware vendors during an automation initiative. Cost was number 1. They claimed that they were being asked by certain vendors to pay some sort of license fee to access certain APIs. I was surprised that was number 1, but it emerged as a common problem, not by a grand margin. Limited access to device data was quite close in second place. And so, they may be accustomed to getting much more data out of their network devices via something like a CLI. But when it comes to getting data via APIs, they're dissatisfied. And one of the focal interviews that I had, touched on this a bit, and you'll see that mentioned in a future slide in this presentation. Give some extra color around there. Poor or outdated APIs is a big issue. Some people I talked to in Focals complain that some of their network hardware still used 10, 15-year-old APIs. Maybe they're using like SOAP-based APIs and rather than modernizing with something like a RESTful interface. Excuse me. And then inconsistency across platforms. So there are some vendors out there that have multiple software platforms driving their hardware. I won't mention any specific vendors, but maybe you have like more than one OS running on your running from a single vendor, or multiple versions of an OS, and you don't have the resources or the windows to standardize on a certain version of that OS, and the APIs aren't consistent across those different software platforms, and that becomes a challenge for you as you're trying to automate. Another essential element of automation is embedded zero-touch provisioning. 39% said that was critical to them. So not as important as the device APIs, but still pretty critical to a significant chunk of these guys. And then more than half said it was helpful to them. On the right, you see the key zero-touch provisioning features that they're looking for. Number one, I want this device to be able to auto-update and verify that the software image is current and properly patched. Number two, I want the device to be ready to interact with custom provisioning pipeline via whatever configuration scripts or automation tools I'm using to provision the device. And then number three, interestingly, unified provisioning with compute and storage. So being able to orchestrate provisioning of service across different elements of the data center, network, compute, and storage. Another essential piece is a network source of truth. So here's a data repository of some kind that can tell you, can inform the network automation solution that changes it makes are going to result in expectations and intent being implemented. Having a database or a repository of some kind that contains your golden configs, your information on current network state, things like device inventories, topology, all kinds of stuff. Depending on what kind of automation solutions you're implementing, you'll identify specific types of data that you want in your source of truth that that ensures your automation solution is automating effectively and not disrupting your network. 41% said that this is essential to automation. 50% said it was helpful. So a little more important than zero-touch provisioning, not quite as essential as a good device API from your hardware vendors. What do they have? Well, a source of truth, it's a singular term. It implies that you have one repository for all your data. That's not very common. 26% said they claim to have a single authoritative repository for all the data they needed for their automation solutions. And I would suggest that maybe some of these guys were being a little generous with themselves, and perhaps there's still some data that they get from a second solution, like, oh, maybe you have all the config data you need and maybe you've managed to combine that with all your network state data, but you still go to some sort of inventory management solution to get your OS version, your serial numbers, things like that. Or maybe you're still storing, maybe you still have a separate IP address management system that has to be referenced occasionally. And that describes the most common state, as these guys told us, multiple authoritative repositories. And authoritative is the operative word there. 63% have that. That means you don't have conflicts between different repositories where your automation solution might draw conflicting data from two separate sources or more, and then you have an automation solution that isn't necessarily getting a true picture of the way your network is supposed to look and the way it actually is looking. And that you see the 10%, multiple repositories with conflicts between them, are the ones that probably have the most problematic environment at this point. Another essential element of automation is analytics. Advanced analytics, or the popular term AI ops now, suggesting advanced heuristics like machine learning, statistical analysis, predictive analysis, used to drive your automation one way or another, or inform your use of automation. Analytic solutions, AI ops solutions that tell you what you should do with your automation tools, or tell the automation tools what to do if you're comfortable with that. 34% said it's essential to their automation initiative right now. 51% said it was helpful, and then 11% said they're thinking about getting this. These are the top 4 use cases. I gave them a list of about a dozen or so. These are the ones that they selected. Drive automation change via analytically derived insights, automated change via analytically derived insights. So that would be, you get some insight from your analytic solution. It allows you to be more comfortable with the changes you make in your automation solution. Optimize network health and performance. That might be driven by a performance monitoring solution that has some heuristics, analytics aimed at telling you what's inhibiting the availability and performance of your network and what kinds of changes you can make. recommend automated actions to a human operator actually sounds kind of similar to what I described, but might also have to do with things like capacity management and things like that. And then finally, translate business logic or intent into network actions, and that kind of touches on the term intent-based networking that many marketers are pushing hard with these days. It's obviously something that's resonating to some extent with these people, and they're looking for automation to implement it. Here are a couple quotes that touch on some of the challenges that people are having with automation and analytics. This one network engineer with a Fortune 50 global pharmaceutical company told us that he kind of flies blind with his automation solution sometimes. He'll push changes to configs, and then he'd love to have a tool that can report back that some sort of verification capability can tell him that the change he made didn't kill the network, or maybe even better, before he pushes the change, something that tells him that this won't kill your network, go ahead and push it. But right now, he waits for an SNMP trap to go to his NOC and tell them that the network went down, and then he has to work with them to identify that the outage is related to the config change he did, and he admitted that in the conversation that did bring down 50 or 60 routers at one point on his global network. And what he's saying here is, if we do something and nothing happens after 15 minutes in terms of an SNMP trap, then we know the change was good. That's not ideal. And then this network engineer at a very large healthcare enterprise in North America, it's a hospital chain, large hospital chain, told us that automation is only as good as the data you receive, and you need analytics to normalize and interpret that data, and we do a lot of that by hand right now. That doesn't sound ideal either for network automation solution spanning a large healthcare enterprise that serves multiple hospitals. Okay, so what are enterprises automating? We asked them to sort of identify the processes that they're targeting. We broke it out by data center network and enterprise network. You see in the data center, these are kind of, you'll see some crossover between the two, but security analysis and anomaly detection is a big one, so using like machine learning, for instance, and other things to automatically detect and understand anomalies, and then you can take action. Network state verification analysis, which would help that pharmaceutical company that was flying blind with their config changes. A big thing for them in the data center. And then network operating system management, so just patching and updating software, that we identified that as a key use case or capability for zero-touch provisioning embedded in network hardware. Security incident remediation, so identifying lateral movement through the enterprise network, or identifying a potential infected host and being able to take some automated change to isolate that host. That's a key use case for them. Network service orchestration, so orchestrating network services to support moves, adds, and changes in the data center, the cloud, or what have you. New application rollouts, things like that, being able to orchestrate the network as a whole for that. And then something a little below that level, configuration change management, just something really basic. And a lot of enterprises consider network change and configuration management solutions to be part of their network automation initiative, even though they're sort of 10, 15-year-old technology. There's still some relevance there, but they're moving past NCCM products into orchestration and more advanced configuration management solutions. On the enterprise network side, which includes campus and WAN and remote site, and also cloud, I just threw the cloud in that side. Security analysis and anomaly detection, still the high priority. And you see network management tool administration. So, I didn't want to forget this. A lot of people spend a lot of time administering their network management solutions, whether it's performance monitoring, configuration management, these network automation solutions themselves. People really want to, at least on the enterprise network side, automate some of that administration. People often complain to me that it takes them, for instance, a lot of time to update the version of a network management tool, and they'd love to automate that. Getting a tool up and running is also a nightmare, especially for enterprises that do a lot of custom work on that tool before they roll it out. looking for opportunities to automate that is really important to them. Security incident remediation and network state verification and analysis are also important here, network service orchestration, and then finally, network fault root cause analysis or guided remediation were priorities for these guys. These are the places in the network that they're focusing the most on in automation. Network security in the data center is the big one. And then virtual networking, like overlays and virtual network functions like software load balancers and software firewalls maybe and things like that, also huge. Not so prominent on this list are, leaf and spine switches or top of rack switches and stuff, which, I mean, a lot of them are doing that, but it was more common to see people saying they're automating the virtual overlays. And some people were like, oh, an overlay is automation, isn't it? That's an SDN solution, and SDN is automation. Well, a lot of people have a lot of manual management around those overlays. Configuring the microsegmentation, the troubleshooting of it, things like that. They need automation of that. And like I said, I've talked to adopters of SDN solutions, whether it's hardware-based or virtual overlay-based solutions that are writing automation specifically for their SDN, so-called SDN solution. But what I'm seeing here is a lot of people are using the overlay as the gateway to automating the switch network in the data center, more so than the physical hardware of the network. Both are common, but virtual overlay is more common. And then data center interconnect and edge routing is another automation target in the data center. And finally, layer 4 through 7 network devices, specifically application delivery controllers and load balancers. On the enterprise side, you see a lot of wireless LAN, remote site LAN targeted, public cloud networking targeted, and then WAN edge branch routing, including SD-WAN. Because again, people told me SD-WAN is not necessarily adoption. SD-WAN is just an easier way to manage your network, and you still want some automation driving that. The depth of automation is shallow. We asked everyone to sort of estimate the percentage of overall day-to-day network management tasks that they are able to automate on different types of network devices. And you see, for the most part, day-to-day, they're only automating less than a third of overall tasks day-to-day, with the exception of firewalls. That's a big priority for them. The data center, they've probably been doing it longer, using maybe automation tools that existed before, like firewall automation tools rather than specific network automation tools, and they've just had a little head start there. So there's more done there. Because there's a whole class of vendors that have been on the market for a while aimed at automating firewall management. Now, network automation isn't easy. What kinds of problems are people having? Excuse me. Just have a quick drink of water. So these are the top challenges that people complain about with respect to the network automation technology they're using or trying to use or are evaluating. Number one, too expensive. That's going to apply to both commercial off-the-shelf stuff, but also maybe too expensive in terms of the resources they have to develop and deploy internally to implement homegrown stuff or open source stuff. But yeah, the price tag is high. Difficult to build or implement. So are you building your own stuff or are you implementing a commercial solution? Either way, some people are finding it difficult. It doesn't scale. Maybe you're able to automate portions of your network, but then when you try to expand, you run into glitches or hang-ups of some kind. Unstable or poor quality. In a commercial solution, that means you've adopted a vendor that has too many bugs, first-generation product maybe, or you've developed something internally that's falling down on the job. And then high administrative overhead. In general, these guys, when I surveyed them, told us that network automation solutions tend to have higher administrative overhead than other network management tools they've used in the past. And 20% of them are identifying that as a lead challenge for them, top challenge for them. 20% also complain that there are certain places in the network they can't automate. Maybe they can't automate their core. They're able to automate their leaf switches, but their spine switch is too complex for whatever automation solution they've used. And then flip side of that, won't automate certain vendors. Maybe you bought something that can handle the market leader and maybe one of the number 2 or 3 vendors, but then maybe you have a 4th or 5th vendor out there that they haven't really built templates for or interfaces for that can drive your automation of those portions of your vendor environment. Business challenges rather than technical challenges of network automation. Security risk was the big one by a decent margin there. So they're worried that automation is going to introduce changes that open up vulnerabilities, for instance, and they are probably deeply involved in a risk assessment. I talked to one person who said that he had completed like his initial implementation of a commercial network automation solution, and now he's been spending the last year and a half convincing IT service management to approve the processes around the use of it. And probably one of the reasons why that is being held up for such a long time is security risk. Budget, they complained about price in the previous slide. Here they're also looking at the fact that they have some budget issues. Culture, staff distrusts or refuses to use automation, which is different from number 5 here. You see fear of layoffs and redundancy, where they're resisting just because they want to protect their jobs. Here they just don't think automation is the best way to do things. And then in number 4, skills gaps. People just suddenly, they've been doing CLI forever, and that's how they deliver value to business, and now they're being asked to do things differently. Here on the right, you see a couple of interesting quotes. A network automation engineer from a large research university tells me that his biggest challenge is pushback from the old guard, as he describes it, and automation scares them. You're taking things away from us that are part of our job, they told him. And he says he thinks that fear is legitimate because the future is software and people need to get on board with it. He may be biased because he's a developer, but he was a network engineer before that, and now he's a network automation engineer and spends most of his time writing code. A network reliability engineer with a mid-sized media and entertainment company told me that even people enthused about automation struggled to get on the right page with him and his initiative. People would tell him, well, we love how you've been able to automate all this config management, but we don't like, we still are going to go into CLI to pull data out of the network when we need to, and when we need to troubleshoot something. And he knows, according to him, that no, the best way to pull that data you need would be through the automation I've implemented. Why can't you see that? He says they couldn't visualize how our solutions could help them. That's a cultural issue, and that's something you got to deal with after you've implemented a solution, a technology. You've technically succeeded with implementing automation, but have you succeeded in convincing people to use it to its full extent to deliver full value to your business? Success does not equal trust. I mentioned earlier, only 37% said they felt fully successful with their network automation initiative right now. Well, 44% fully trust their automation. And it's a pretty close correlation between success and trust. A few more of them trust it than they do feel successful. It's kind of strange, but 50% partially trust it, and 5% said, "I don't trust this at all." There is not necessarily a correlation between trust and success, though, as these 2 quotes from here. Network automation engineer from a large research university tells us you can trust automation as much as you can trust your own ability. It's software and a machine that you control. If you program your robot incorrectly, it's going to do something incorrectly. If it's a giant robot, it's going to stomp on your network and destroy it unless you're careful. Network reliability engineer with that mid-sized media and entertainment company said that he trusts the tools, but he doesn't trust the data that he's using. He doesn't have good source control, and he's struggling there. Skills gaps. I mentioned earlier that many of the, I think like 20, 25% identified skills gaps are a big issue for them with automation. Well, here's how everyone, we also asked them, like, are you training up your people on to support network automation? And I think about more than 90% said yes. Here's the responses to what they're focused on. You see training on specific network automation tools is the big priority. So it's about learning how to use the tools that have been put in place, which makes a lot of sense. Maybe you're training them yourself as an implementer, or you're turning to your commercial software vendor to help you set up a training program. Probably they have one available on demand. For the most part, that's what you're going to see. Cross-team training, also a big priority. So you're pulling these people out of being gearheads focused solely on in box-by-box management of the network. Now you're asking them to support something more of a network platform enabled by automation. So now it's time for them to understand the processes and the tools and the best practices that are used in other IT domains so they can interface with those people, maybe integrate automation with those tools and drive more of like a DevOps initiative or internal service provider initiative or something. And then number 3, data science knowledge. Expertise with advanced algorithms, data structures, data models. So you see, maybe you're implementing some sort of AI ops technology, and you need people internally that can maximize the value of that analytics capability with respect to your network automation initiative. You see at the bottom, formal programming and software engineering concepts and new scripting languages and techniques like Python, least priority. Although a lot of the people I talked to one-on-one saw that as a big issue. But here it seems like it's not necessarily a huge priority for everyone on the network team to learn how to code and write software. You're probably going to need 1 or 2 of those people. But in the case of people I talked to one-on-one, they're usually like network engineers who just learned to code in their own time before automation was on their radar, and they were identified by their employers as like a potential person to plug in or take over an initiative. One guy told me, actually, it might be on the next slide. Yeah, closing the skills gap. Yes, I mentioned 37% said they were devoting very significant resources to training up network teams, and that is not easy to do. This one network automation engineer at a large entertainment company, not the mid-sized one that I cited earlier, said that companies need to set aside real time to let network engineers develop skills. With network automation programming, you can't just send a person to a 1-week boot camp and turn them into a software developer like you would with, get them certified. You can't, it's harder to turn someone into a software developer than it is to get them certified on a specific network product. It's just a lot more knowledge, a lot more critical thinking, a lot more formal processes that they have to learn as they're doing this. And then the network team isn't the only one with a skills gap. This network automation engineer with a very large software company told me that management took him, a networking person, into the network automation programming role because there were very visible gaps in the team's existing programming group with respect to network knowledge. Like they had a big app dev team internally that they were going to pivot towards network automation, but none of them knew what the network was about. And so they needed to bring in some software savvy people from the network team to support that, and that worked for him. So that is the extent of my presentation. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to kick off the Q&A. But before I do that, I just want to point out Enterprise Network Automation for 2020 and beyond. It's a 45, 50-page report in our research library right now if you're interested in getting all the information in it, because this is only sort of the tip of the iceberg. You can download that from a research library for a fee, or if you're a current subscriber, it's included in your subscription. But thanks for your time, and now Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Seamus. We have a few questions for you. Did you ask people why they are automating the network? What are they trying to achieve?
Yeah, we asked them what their business goals were. The top response was risk reduction. They're aiming at reducing security risk or compliance risk, or maybe risk of like performance and availability outages, like just being able to automate config management for one thing, but also service orchestration and also automating operational processes can really help you protect the network from security and compliance violations and also performance and availability. So that was like their big priority. And actually, incidentally, their number 2 priority was reducing or eliminating human error. And then the other drivers, rounding out the top 4, were about proactive problem prevention, or no, proactive problem detection. Being able to get ahead of the curve, because about 40% of IT service degradation is detected by end users before the IT operations is aware of them, based on our research over the years. So being able to improve that number is one target with automation. And then the final top 4 effort is about the establishment of some kind of self-service infrastructure. So putting together an automation platform with interfaces into DevOps, CloudOps, things like that, so the business can be more self-service around the network.
Great. Were there any questions related to brownfield deployments? Is network automation a higher priority for greenfield versus brownfield?
I didn't get into that question. I didn't ask them to define greenfield versus brownfield. I think most of the people I talked to one-on-one were automating brownfield. They were identifying individual tasks that need to be automated on their existing network. They were really tackling existing infrastructure. And they were looking towards greenfield as the next opportunity, actually. Like one guy I talked to said that his data center architect was evaluating different software-defined networking solutions for the data center, and he was preparing to extend his automation initiative to that when it got put into place. But for now, he was more focused on automating the brownfield environment. And that was the overwhelming environment that I saw for the one-on-one interviews. Now, the people that I surveyed, I failed to ask that question. I was more focused on tasks they're automating, places in the network that they're automating. I probably should have asked greenfield versus brownfield, so I apologize for that.
Did your audience consider advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and what is the general perception of those technologies in the networking teams now?
They see it as an important part of network automation. Most of them were trying to use it to some extent. I don't think a lot of them fully understand or believe in some of the marketing around concepts like machine learning and AI, but they do see the direction that vendors are taking, and they do see the value there. Like, they really want advanced analytics like machine learning and things like that to make it easier for them to drive automation and management of the network in general. And they clearly see it as an essential component of a network automation initiative, but a lot of them are struggling to close the loop between things like machine learning and AI and their automation initiatives.
Great. In your interviews or survey, were you offered examples of vendor offerings or actions that are improving the state of network automation, like special automation training, increased solution automation, software partnerships?
I'm seeing that question now. I'm just going to reread it really quickly. In your interviews or survey, were you offered examples of vendor offerings or actions that are improving the state of network automation? Now, in the survey, I didn't ask them what they thought of specific vendors. I did ask them what vendors they were using. I did not make that public, but I will tell you that Cisco was at the top of the list, because Cisco is always at the top of the list whenever I ask network professionals what vendors they're using, and it's just their default answer to a question like that. The vendors the people I talked to one-on-one, I know what they were using. A lot of them were using Ansible, either the commercial offer, either Ansible Tower from Red Hat, or some of them are using the open source project as a core piece of their homegrown automation. Coincidentally, one of them was using Glueware, a sponsor of this research, even though I found him independently by trolling LinkedIn. A lot of them were using I can't remember off the top of my head what they're also using. Some of them found the open source stuff difficult to work with. They were quite happy with the commercial technology, but I didn't. This research wasn't really focused on which vendor's doing what best. It wasn't a vendor comparison. It was more focused on like technology goals, use cases, best practices, challenges that were independent of vendor. So I didn't really get too deep into the areas you're asking there.
Is there an appetite for network automation via the cloud? Are they okay to share network data with SaaS vendors?
In general, I'm finding increased interest in SaaS-based solutions, cloud-based solutions for engineering operations on the network in general. There's less of a bias against using that. There are certain vertical markets that are nervous about it. One of them actually, I think, one of the focal interviews I talked to told me that, not in this research, but a previous research project on network performance management, where I asked him about. This was published in May. I did a research project similar to this, but I was just looking at the state of the art of network performance management in IT organizations. And I was asking people, like, are you interested in or using advanced analytics like AI Ops that is integrated in or native to your network performance management solutions? And one of them said that he was resistant to his chosen vendor's AI Ops type platform because it was cloud-based and he didn't want to send his data up into it. He was in a regulated industry, so I think you'll see some pushback from certain regulated industries about implementing SaaS-based network automation that requires some data to go out into the cloud, even if you can validate that it's anonymized or metadata that doesn't really expose any of their sensitive data. They're still going to be resistant to it. But I think a lot of vertical industries are pretty open to it now.
Do they like network automation to be a CapEx or prefer to be an OpEx instead?
I did not ask them about that, but I think in general when it comes to network management software, the industry is kind of split on their preference.
Okay. How are companies actually benefiting from a true network source of truth?
So it makes I asked that question. I don't have the data in front of me, but one of the things off the top of my head is it makes it easier for them to support new technologies that they introduce to their network. So they introduce like a new feature, like a new feature gets introduced to their network on their switching and routing, what have you, or they are introducing a new vendor. Having good source of truth provides a smoother transition to whatever they're adopting. Also, it makes it easier for them to translate intent into technical implementation of automation, because when you have all the data, it's available to you in a source of truth. It's modeled properly. When you drive business logic into automation through some sort of interface, the data just enables a smoother implementation or translation of that intent. Those are two things that I can remember off the top of my head.
Great. Well, that concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and keep an eye out for an email from EMA soon.
Thanks. Bye.